In this video, I want to give you my 10 best cursor tips. These tips will help you get the best results out of cursor and make your life a little bit easier. Let's go. First, the tech stack that you choose, it really matters. The more popular the libraries or languages that you're using, the better the results. The AI behind cursor had to be trained, as any large language model does, and the more sources that it has, the better the results. For example, JavaScript has over 500,000 repositories on GitHub, so plenty of fodder there. Python's got almost 500,000. Fortran, though, less than 2,000. So choose your tech stack very, very wisely. Second, you really need to have a plan as you come in. Don't go in blindly and just start giving it commands. You're going to end up with some spaghetti. You need to focus on two specific areas. First, scope. You need to ask yourself before you ever give cursor its first command, what are you trying to accomplish? What's this project going to look like when you're finished? Break that down into the major modules that the application will have and ask yourself, what are all of these different modules going to do? What is their purpose? If they have no purpose, don't include them. If they do have a purpose, make sure you really understand exactly what that purpose is. And don't forget rules. You want to kind of hem in the AI as much as possible and not allow it to just go crazy. I would always make sure that you're making security the most important aspect of the application. Remember that you want this application to be maintained long term. I think this ties in directly with scope. The better your plan, the more likely it is to be maintainable. As we've already talked about, what is your tech stack? All of these things can be included inside of the cursor rules file. And on that tech stack, what are the options available? Ask yourself where your data is going to be stored. You can see that the rules for AI, it's almost like you're setting up a persona, and that persona has to be giving some type of rules. If you don't, then it's just going to do whatever it thinks is best. There's been a couple of times that I've sat down and had an Angular application open, and cursor has instead decided to write React. Always include the rules. You can remind it inside of the composer or chat, but if you include a rules file, it's not necessary. It'll just do the right thing, right being whatever you're wanting it to do. I've actually started keeping an external library of rules, and I divide it into sections. So if I'm working with Angular, I have some rules for Angular that I can just copy and paste into my rules file. If I'm working with C# or ASP.NET Core, whether it be MVC or Web API, I can easily just copy those rules into the rules section. I recommend you do the same. You're going to find yourself, especially if you work across multiple projects or if you're in the beginning stages of learning cursor, that you're going to be using those rules and retyping them a lot. It's easier to just keep the library so you don't forget them. My next tip is don't have blind faith in the code that's created by the AI. Always verify. Make sure that you are checking for generally just bad practices in the code that's created. But you can see in this, as the screen share is going, that a lot of errors are actually created by cursor. And for whatever reason, I have to go back, or you will have to go back and correct these errors. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Don't trust it, not by default. My next tip, especially if you're a developer, you should always try to include an image of a UI that you like that is close to what you're trying to get, maybe even the screenshot of a competitor that you can use to scaffold out the user interface so that you can focus on getting the code correct. As you can see here, I gave it a screenshot of Trello's user interface and it recreates it. For the most part, the navigation's missing and things, but getting the cards correct, easy cheesy. My next tip to keep in mind is that cursor is not code generation, it's code creation. So if you do have errors in the commands that you give it, and if it doesn't create something correctly, it can correct those errors. My next tip is context matters. In the Cursor documentation, you can find a list of contexts that you can give it, including files, folders, code, web, docs you get in Codebase. If you're not going for something external, if you use Composer, it keeps the entire Codebase in mind, but it slows down your development. However, using Composer instead of just chat, it really, it makes things a lot easier if you are in a smaller project. The larger the project, the slower it's going to be. And man, the more RAM it's going to eat. This thing is hungry. It's more hungry than Chrome. My next tip is you need to be realistic. You can find on YouTube videos, thousands of videos from people claiming that they can create a billion-dollar app in half an hour. Do not believe this. It's fake. They're just trying to get clicks. You are going to have to spend a lot of time on anything that you build. Now, granted, with Cursor, it's going to be a lot less than you would spend if you were doing everything by hand. But really, if you're expecting to build a $500 million app in 15 minutes, you deserve what you get. Make sure you're taking advantage of settings in Cursor. You can find the Cursor settings in the command palette just by filtering out Cursor. And what you're wanting is Cursor settings. And you can actually go through and make sure that all of this meets your needs, like turning on rules files, whether or not you want your code and the metrics about your code going back to Cursor. If you want to keep things private, I recommend that you do so. You can choose which large language models to use. You can turn on and off features inside of Cursor, such as enabling Composer. And you can turn on the beta features. This list may not look like yours, depending on where the Cursor's at in its lifetime, but definitely take advantage of it. My next tip is you need to understand when to use Composer and when to use chat. You want to use Composer, especially early on in your application when you're trying to create the bulk of the code. But later on, when you're trying to zero in on the feature, especially if that feature just includes a few files, then it's probably better to use chat and you'll get better results from it. You'll definitely get faster results. And my last tip is make sure that you're taking advantage of the trial. It's free for, I think, 2 weeks, and you get quite a bit of code generation from that. It will probably shock you on how few of your credits are used for generating a large amount of code. So definitely take advantage before you subscribe. I am a subscriber. I really think it's awesome, but make sure it's right for you before you spend the money. And my question to you is, what are your favorite tips? Did I leave something out that everyone should really, really know? If so, leave them in the comments. Until next time, happy coding.